Alright, welcome back to our advanced tutorial series of the MD-11. I am your host Mustafa, and today we're going to be looking at cockpit familiarization. So we can learn where everything is. This should be a little easier than on the Mad Dog because, like I said in the previous video, there's a lot more automation, a lot less things you have to remember where they are because there's not much you're interacting with in the overhead, at least, as much as you do on the MD-80. You can find me over on Twitch, twitch.tv/Mustafa, where I stream around 3 times a week. And love to see you over there. Come say hello. Come watch the flight sim streams. And we do stream some other things as well, like Railroads Online and American Truck Simulator occasionally. But you can also encourage to join the Discord. Links down in the description below where the real conversation happens. You can ask questions there. You can also feel free to ask questions in the comments here. I do pay attention and read the comments and try to answer all questions one way or the other eventually. It's just I'm faster at getting them in the Discord than I am on YouTube. So if you want your question answered fast, Discord's the way to go. But hit that like button and subscribe on this channel. It helps the channel grow. I'd really appreciate it. And with that, let's get into it. We're back on the flight deck of the MD-11 by TFDi. Alright, so here is the flight deck of the TFDi Md-11, and it is a little different than the MD-80. Main differences are we're higher up. We also don't have the windows segregated into quite as many pieces. Bigger windows. We've got 3 handles here for the throttles because we have 3 engines instead of 2. But again, it's laid out like any other airplane. You've got the yokes, you've got your displays with your PFD, your ND, your engine instruments. You have an overhead panel with all your systems, you've got your throttles, and you've got your radios. And so if you kind of know how one plane is laid out, you can usually guess where most things are within reason. And that definitely works for this here. So we're going to go into cockpit familiarization, and we're going to start with the most complicated part of any cockpit, and that's the overhead panel usually. So we're going to start there. I'm going to zoom my view down a little bit, and we'll do kind of an overview here first, and then we'll go into depth and talk about those individually. So the overhead panel is split up into well, it's technically 5 sections, although there's nothing on the first section here. But it's primarily divided up into 3 that you're going to interact with. And that's this panel here, this big center panel here, and this guy on the side here. And if you want to even segregate further, the lights as their own kind of panel down here. And then obviously you've got your big fire handles right up here. So the way you would normally flow through this is kind of how we're going to go over this anyway. So you have your fire system up here. And really this whole top section is a form of fire stuff. So you have the main engine fire handles right here. We have our cargo fire panel right here. And over here we have our APU fire handle and test, and then some APU specific buttons. So this is APU/APU fire panel. But this is the button where we test the entire fire system right here, not just the APU. Moving down below that, we've got the hydraulic panel, is this little guy here. And these are labeled, by the way, for your help. Right on the sides here, hydraulic, electric, air, fuel. So you can kind of see what these panels are. So that should help make that a little bit easier if you get lost. But the first one here is the hydraulic panel. This button right here says system. This is, first of all, I should say, this cockpit operates in a dark cockpit configuration, meaning lights off is good. Anything that's illuminated is usually intentionally to draw your eye to either there is a problem or it's a status that is not necessarily normal for flight, but you need to be aware of it. So a good example is like this green available light for the external power. It's not active right now. It's not something that would always be around, and so it shows a green available when there's plugged in external power. Same thing with the APU power right below it. We would see a green available light and a blue on light when they're turned on, so that we know. So when these guys are dark, they're not available, they're not in use, because that's the normal condition for the aircraft. Remember, think normal is like cruising at 35,000 feet. So these guys would be dark. Whereas with the hydraulic panel, if you had lights on here, it's usually going to indicate like a low pressure condition, or one of the transfer pumps is on, because that's not necessarily normal. Those are usually keeping things isolated unless the system fails, things like that. But this system light, the system button right here, and each one of these has a system button. So you have system here, electrical system, the air system, and the fuel system have these things, and they're dark by default. And if you click them, you can't do that right now because I don't have any power on the aircraft, they would go into manual. And now you have manual control. Otherwise, if it's dark and the plane is powered, the computer is managing this. The computer, so all this big section right here is basically going to be managed by the computer. And the only time you need to touch it is if something has kind of gone wrong or you need to override something for some reason. So there's a big chunk of this panel you're never going to have to really mess with, except when we're starting it up and doing some tests. So that makes your job easier. But we have our various pumps on the hydraulic panel here, the systems themselves. So these pumps power system 3, these pumps power system 2, these pumps power system 1, and these are the transfer pumps in between, so you can see how they all interconnect with each other, and you can see the flow of how they flow around each other. And then you have the auxiliary pumps. So when we don't have the engines running, we can run these off electrical and power our hydraulics that way. You also have this guarded system test light, system test button that we will use when we're starting the plane to test the hydraulic system. All right, moving on down is the electrical system. And again, a lot of buses and things that are all going to be handled manually for you. The main things to know about where they are here is your battery switch right here, your emergency power arm and on switch, and then your external power and your APU power switches. These are the main 4 things that you're probably going to interact with at any given time. You've got your generator switches. Again, this will be handled automatically, but in the event of you go to manual mode, you'll have to do it. Your generator drive switches, typically these, they're guarded because once you disconnect them, they usually can only be reconnected on the ground. So don't ever flip these unless you don't want that generator to come back on until you're back on the ground. You have various AC bus ties, DC bus ties, emergency bus ties, battery bus ties, all that stuff. And most of these are just lights to tell you what's happening with those systems. So that's the electrical panel. And again, that system setting right there, the system switch and cabin bus right there. All right. Below that, we have our air panel. This is our pneumatics. This is primarily for comfort, normally of the passengers, although we're hauling freight, so it's really just us. We have a cockpit. This says courier and cargo. I'm not sure which one is handling the deck and which one is handling maybe below. Well, no, below is all over here. So I'm not sure what the difference between courier and cargo is. This might be just the very back, like right behind us, and then the cargo hold itself. Not that there's like a hard barrier there, but it's just dividing the area up into sections. Let's see, we have the system button to put this thing into manual mode or back into auto mode, which is what it defaults to. You have an econ button, the trim air, the avionics fans. Again, all this stuff will be handled by the computer. You don't have to do it. The masks switch, so don't push that unless you want the rubber jungle. It's not like it's going to be simulated anyway, but it's there. Isolation switches, bleed air switches. Again, the only real stuff you need to mess with on this panel is probably these dials here to decide if you want more cool or more hot in the cabin, cockpit, whatever. And then the APU air switch is right down here. So when you bring the APU online, you want to make sure that APU air is running too, and you'll need that APU air in order to start the engine. So again, when we go over the startup procedures for this, we'll cover that. Below that is the last of the big automatic systems, and that's a fuel system. Again, there's that system switch for the automatics. You've got a quantity test button that you will probably interact with. And then beyond that, it's fill and cross-feed pumps and stuff. And again, the computer is going to handle all of this for you. The only reason you need to do anything with it is if the computer fails, or you feel like the computer is doing something wonky and you need to get fuel somewhere that it's not. So hydraulic, electric, air, and fuel. Those are the big 4. Coming below that is our lighting panel. We'll kind of talk about this whole panel right here by itself. So you got windshield wipers on either side. You have a fuel dump, emergency stop button right here as part of the fuel dump and the fuel manifold switches, which again all should be guarded, and they're red and guarded to tell you do not touch these unless you are absolutely in need of doing it, and usually when a checklist tells you to do it. You've got a dome light, a thunderstorm light. The thunderstorm light, by the way, some people wonder about this. Generally, the idea behind this is if you're flying at night and your cockpit, most cockpits will be very, very dark because the pilots need to be able to see outside and keep their situational awareness. And if that's the case, and you are and you're flying through or near a thunderstorm and lightning strikes somewhere, it will light up the entire cockpit like a strobe light, like a camera flash, and it will be blinding because your eyes are in night vision mode. And if that's the case, now you're going to lose your ability to see for a little bit. And so you can kind of help that by turning the lights up in the cockpit when you're in those situations. You won't really be able to see much out anyway because you're probably surrounded by clouds. So seeing outside the cockpit isn't as important as being able to see the instruments. And so the thunderstorm light is a quick way to just turn like all the lights on in the cockpit and illuminate the crap out of it. So that way, if that happens, your eyes don't have to go from 0 to 60 in like microsecond and throw off your pupils and all that stuff. So that's what that is. The overhead panel and floodlights. So the outside guy here is the panel light. That's the backlighting of the overhead panel. The inner knob is a floodlight for the panel. Right below that is a instrument and pedestal, panel light and floodlight in the same configuration. The center is the flood, the outside is the panel. And next to that we have the emergency lights. They're in the off position. You can set those to arm and on. Now, some switches, I'm going to warn you now, on the MD-11, they've done some kind of weird things. So you notice I can't click on this switch. I'm clicking right now. Clicking does nothing. This is looking for a roll of your scroll wheel to activate this. I think also right-clicking might normally do it, but I think I have my right-click disabled. No, I don't think it does. The funny thing is, some of these switches are intuitive and some of them aren't. So this one, I'm scrolling up to bring the switch down. And now I'm scrolling down to bring it up. But there are other switches, like the GPWS, that I scroll down to put it down and up to put it up. So I'm hoping those are things that they'll eventually like synchronize so they're all the same. But most of them are backwards. And this one, usually it's just 3 position switches that you are forced to do that with your scroll wheel. If it's like the thunderstorm light, I can't scroll over it. I have to click it, and then it's just a toggle. So it's kind of goofy. I wish they would have made them so they all do the scroll wheel, even if they are 2 position, and they all click, or at least, you click in a certain way or something. So, but the long and short is some of these work with a scroll and some of them don't. And so you're just going to have to remember which ones do and which ones don't. That's kind of a goofy way they did that. I'm hoping they'll change that. Standby compass light right there. There's the standby compass. You can actually push it up out of the way or have it dangling down. You got your emergency light test right here. These 3 are your landing and taxi lights. So landing lights, there's 3 positions here. So there's the retract. So this is retracted, extended, and then on. So you have 3 positions. So the only on is the fully down, but because they retract into the fuselage, they've got 3. And then the nose light has 3 positions as well. It has the taxi mode and the landing mode. So it's just basically it's a brighter taxi light when it's in landing mode. No smoke and seatbelt signs, off, auto, and on for both of these guys. Typically no smoke you would just leave on, and then seatbelts, that's that auto we talked about in the previous video. If you want to have the seatbelts automatically turn on and off with either altitude or configuration. Otherwise you can just put them on and then put them off when you want them off. Up to you. Over here are the lights for kind of the position lights, if you will. So you have your runway turn off lights, wing and runway turn off lights left and right. Your nav lights, these should always be on whenever the aircraft is powered. your logo light, which is the light that shines on the tail, the beacon or the anti-collision light, which is the rotating beacons on the top and bottom of the airplane. These should be on anytime the aircraft is about to move or the engines are running. That's usually the thing, or the aircraft is actively moving, obviously. And then the high intensities are your strobes on the end of the wings. So anytime you're going to enter a runway environment or cross a runway environment, you want to turn those on. And then those should be on anytime you're taking off, landing, and just in the air in general. I don't believe these do anything. I don't know if they do anything on the passenger version. There's really no reason to do anything on the freighter version because you don't have the need for a PA and all kinds of cabin announcements. So I don't know if these do anything or if they even beep on the passenger one. I haven't really flown the passenger version. I've just been flying the freighter. So those are there. And then you go to windshield wiper. All right, so let's go back up and talk about the two side panels since we didn't really talk about those yet. We have the cargo fire panel over here. We have our navigation switches. These are our IRSs. It says so right there, Inertial Reference System. And you just flip these onto nav and they will light up and they will blink if they align, but you haven't given any coordinates in the FMC yet or initialized them. So if you get them to the point where they're blinking up here, that's telling you, hey, we're ready, but you didn't do something. And so you need to turn your attention down to the FMC here. Right below that is the cockpit voice recorder. There's nothing really to mess with here, other than you can hold the test button, and when you have power, you'll see the needle go to test it. In the passenger version, you'll have a galley bus, but it's deactivated in the freighter for obvious reasons. And then you also have the generator bus fault resets. Again, for ground use only. So, like I said, you can't reset that stuff in the air. Cargo temp for the belly cargo stuff. That's not for the main deck. That's for the stuff in the front and back of the aircraft on either side of the wing, underneath the main deck. These are the upper aux tank bypass and aux trans tank pumps. I don't know if these exist on the non-ER version. So these you may not see. But if you're in the ER, if you have the ER, if you're a collector's edition, then you should have these, I believe. And you have it set to extend on. This may exist in the regular one too, but I just don't know. Below that, engine ignition and the engine FADEX, the full authority digital engine control system. But you always want to make sure those are guarded and dark. Remember, dark doesn't mean off. Dark means okay. And same thing with engine ignition. You've got two systems, A, B, and an override. So that's all that's on that side. Over here, we talked about already the APU panel, which has the fire handle for the APU, the engine APU fire test, and then APU start stop. This is, I'm going to say this now, and I'm also going to say this when I do the startup procedure, because it's a bit of a misnomer. This is one of those things that trips people up. You can start the APU here, but this is not the standard procedure to do that. The standard start procedure is to push APU power here. And the reason for that is there's logic circuits built into the automatics that will automatically take care of APU connection and shutdown if you start it from here. If you start it from here, it's like putting the APU in full manual, and you're going to have to remember to do all of that. At a certain point, this was not modeled correctly, so it was shutting down when it wasn't supposed to, even if you did it this way. I don't recall if that's been fixed yet. So you may find that you start it here and it still shuts down automatically when you start the engines. If it does that, that's actually not correct behavior, and it is something I hope TFDi will eventually fix. But they may have already. I just don't know. Just to the side of that is the GPWS test and terrain override stuff. The test you can only perform when your IRSs are fully aligned. So you won't do that right away. You'll come back after IRS alignment has been accomplished. Over here is your LSAS system, leading edge devices, and yaw dampers, and flap limits, and elevator feel, and all this stuff. This is the computer's systems to kind of help you fly the plane and give you the right feel is what this is. So generally you just want these switches in auto and all of these lights out. I forget what LSAS stands for. I think it's oh shoot, I used to know it, but it's probably something augmentation system. Yeah, I don't know. Anyway, it has something to do. It's the computer. This is the computer that helps you fly. The amount of fly-by-wire that's in the MD-11 is this guy right here. Cabin pressure. Again, system button right here. We'll keep it in auto. If you need to do it manually, you've got you can put it in manual. You can manually set the landing altitude then, and you can climb and descend the cabin pressure as needed. And you've got a little schedule over here to help you. Ditching switches right here, although it's not modeled. That would close up all the various ports and extremities to make the aircraft turn into as much of a boat as it can, so that you could float for as long as possible, although it will eventually sink, as we saw in the Hudson. All right, anti-ice. Engine 1, 2, 3 anti-ices. You got wing anti-ice, you got tail anti-ice, windshield anti-ice, and then defog. And the defog you generally just put on. These actually, I think, are all pretty much on anyway by default when you boot up the aircraft. So we'll look at those when we do that. But yeah, that's your like windshield stuff and engine stuff. Below that, you have various some annunciators and test buttons. So you have the annunciator bright and dim knob here. You have the annunciator test button, cargo door test, fuel used reset. So on the fuel screen, you'll see in each engine symbol the amount of fuel each engine has consumed since the last time this button was pushed. So usually at the beginning of a flight, you push that button. And then the engine max pointer reset if you need to reset where the engine guide is. It'll be easier to explain when we have the screens on. And that's the overhead. So it's not too bad. Again, most stuff is automatic. And that's that. Let's come down here to the glare shield. That's this guy here. And there's a couple of little alerters here, just not buttons, they're just the lights. You do have a few buttons here. Your master warning and caution lights are here. And then this is the glide slope inhibit button and light. So if it's warning you, glide slope, this is where you shut it up at. Again, for the flight guidance system is the panel light and the flood light. Flood is in the middle, panels on the outside like before. And moving across, we have your baro set knob, so you can do QFE or QNH. QNH is the standard, what we usually fly with. And then you can also set this between inches of mercury and hectopascals by clicking that button. Right below that is the minimums button, so you have radio altimeter minimums or baro minimums. You can push that to reset. You spin the knob to set your minimums. And on this one, you click it, and it will pull to set standard. So you can set 2992. When you or 1013 if you're in hectopascals when you hit transition altitude. Over here is various things that you want to see on your ND. So traffic data, waypoint, VOR, NDB, and airports. So you can put that data on here or not by clicking those buttons. You can put your compass on here in magnetic or true. Again, normally in the airplanes we fly in magnetic. The only time we go to true is if we get too close to the North Pole and the magnetic becomes unreliable. Then you have your modes for your ND, map mode, VOR mode, TCAS mode, plan mode, and approach mode. Again, normally we're on map. And for the references on that display, you've got VOR 1, 2, ADF 1, 2, and then the range increase and decreases right there. This also is the push button to switch between terrain and weather. I don't believe in what I was seeing on the Discord servers earlier. I don't believe that terrain or weather is implemented at the moment. I'm hoping they're going to at least enable the terrain. I'm kind of surprised the terrain's not activated yet. But that was just one person in the Discord, so don't take that as face value. It could be wrong. It does not give me the test pattern when I do the GPWS test, though. That's all I know so far. Coming over here further, this is where you're actually going to control the autopilot. And so we got our speed window first. You can switch between indicated airspeed and Mach. And you can do FMS speed here, which is basically giving control over to the computer. There's the way you toggle these, though. This is where it gets a little funny. So you can scroll it using the scroll wheel back and forth. And then if you put your mouse below it, you get the down arrow and you get the up arrow. The up arrow is to push the button into the computer. It's a push. So up away from you. Down is toward you. and you're pulling the button. And just like in the Airbus, pull is usually giving you more manual control. Pushing is usually giving the computer more control. But it depends on the switch. So I believe in this one, pushing it will set the current speed that you're going as the active speed. Pulling it will set whatever speed's in the window to be the current to be the current hold speed. So as an example, if you're doing 230 knots and this says 310, if I hit the up right there and push it, it'll set now 230 because it's setting basically what I'm doing here. Whereas if I'm doing if I'm holding 250 right now, let's say the FMS is in control, I'm holding 230 and I have 310 in the window and I pull it, it's now going to take control away from the computer and it's going to try and hold 310 because I'm pulling the control into it. This one, you're not giving the computer control by pushing here, you're giving the computer control by pushing FMS speed because there's a special button for that. Next to it is the heading, and again we got heading and track you can set there. The window, obviously. You can change the bank angle. It's normally set to auto, but you can change the max bank angle, 10, 15, 20, 25, all the way around. You set your heading by, let's see, I think it's a pull, and this has the similar effect of pushing will set the current heading to the box heading. So if this says 180 degrees, but you're currently flying 90 degrees, by doing this, it will set 90. Because it'll set whatever our current heading is. If we're flying 90 and this is 180 and I pull it toward me, then that's going to tell the autopilot, nope, I want you to fly. The 180 degrees is in the box and the aircraft's going to start turning, assuming you're in autopilot. And then hitting nav obviously puts the FMS in control and flies the nav route, assuming the nav is something that is capturable at the moment. I'm going to skip over the middle for a second because while we're talking about the different modes here. So we talked about speed, we talked about heading. Here is altitude, and altitude has kind of two things tied to it, and that is you have your main altitude window, which again you set using the knob. Again, you have a push and a pull, and again similar thing. Pushing it will set the current altitude to the heading hold window. Pulling it will activate whatever is in that window. Profile mode will allow the computer to fly the profile. It's like verticals. It's like VNAV. And then if you do pull it, then you can attain that altitude if you're not already there by setting your vertical speed here, and you can change between vertical speed and flight path angle. I've never used flight path angle, but it's an option. Okay. Then you have over back in the middle here, you have your auto flight button, your approach land button, and your auto flight system override off buttons. This is like a main override. If you're having trouble getting your autopilot disconnect or something, just kill all that. That's a good way to do it. The proper way to kill the autopilot is to hit the autopilot disconnect right there. And the best way to do that is to map that to a button on your controller. And one of my videos, I use SPAD to do all my settings, which can also get kind of wonky, but it gives you a lot more options. I'm going to do a video on my SPAD settings for this aircraft, so that can hopefully help you. Things may change down the road, but at least as of right now, that's what I'm using. For your auto throttle, by the way, the disconnect is right here. And just so you know, this does have a toga button, which is only really ever used in the go-around mode. It's not used for takeoff, and it's because the takeoff is basically done automatically. So it's not technically a toga button, it's just a GA button, a go-around button. And it's actually this right here, that little button right there, which is really easy to hit in the cockpit. But it's not easy when you're sitting here and you look over, it's almost flat. I mean, it's kind of hard to get, and if those throttles are forward at all, good luck. So what TFDi did is they made that a button on this screw right here. So this screw is your traditional toga button, or really in this case just go around button. So that you can hit there, and it'll actually see that button click when you hit that screw. All right, and then the first officer has the exact same thing that on his EFIS panel that you had over here. So we don't need to cover that. Coming down around, obviously the tablet over on this side, we have the oxygen, we have the tiller. The oxygen, I thought we were able to test the oxygen, but as of today, it doesn't do anything. But I could have sworn we could, but maybe I'm just not thinking of that. So that may be something that comes later. So it's there. You can't interact with it in any way. The tilter does move when you steer. Again, you can steer either with your rudder pedals or with tiller axis if you have a separate axis for a tiller. I'm using a joystick as a tiller, so I have a separate axis. But if you don't have that, Microsoft generally just links your rudders to the tiller for you. Over on this side is where you have your ability to turn the flight director off if you need to. And then these buttons are all about switching your source. So by default, the captain's FMC is linked to the captain's instruments. The IRS-1 is linked to the captain's, all that stuff. But you can switch into alternate mode by pushing this. So if you had a problem with one of those systems, you could deal with that here and switch over to the working system. Same with the EIS source. You can go into 1, 2, or aux and do all that right there. Normally, you just leave that in number 1 and leave all those switches normal. Obviously, your static air source, you want normal unless something happens, but this is not modeled at the moment, so you can't do it anyway. Are any of these? Yeah, so we have floor lights down here, the briefcase lights. That's a radio push to talk. That doesn't do anything for you. And then timer stuff for the chrono, which is on the screen. You can mess with right there. All right. Moving on down to the center, obviously we have our screens, our PFD, our ND, and then these are going to be engine instruments on the inner two, and then ND and PFD for the FO. We have our standby instruments, which will either be these or they'll be the single digital standby instrument. That's up to you. You got the 2 FMCs, your primary for the captain and for the first officer. You also have a third one down here that can just do ACARS. There is ACAR stuff implemented in this, CPLDLC with Hoppy and all that stuff. Your hydraulic accumulator for the brakes shows your brake pressure right there, and you can actually trigger aux pump 1 from here. So if that pressure is too low, you can boost that up before you get the engine pumps running. Anti-skid, you can deactivate that if you want to. And auto brake, takeoff for takeoff, and then min, medium, and max for when you're landing. Is this simulated? I don't think this is. This is the boost bar, and I don't think this is simulated. In the real aircraft, your throttles go all the way up to the boost bar and stop. My throttle's not going to do that. Would go to the boost bar and stop, and then if you push really hard or slam the throttles, it'll push that bar out of the way, and you'll get a few extra little movement of the throttle, and you actually get a little bit more engine power. And it's basically an emergency engine power, like we gotta give everything she's got, but they don't want you to go into that unless you absolutely have to. So anyway, that's there, but I don't believe that's modeled in this one. I think it was in the PMDG, but that's a bygone era. Your brakes are right here. So that is toward you is brakes set, away from you is brakes released. Suitcase handles is the trim, which you would normally do on the yoke itself, preferably with a something on your, whether your flight stick or your yoke, physical yoke, will move the trim indicator. You won't see these move because they're just a forward and back position, very similar to the MD-80. There's no trim wheel. It's all digital. It's all electric. So when you move that or these, you'll see the trim moving on the screen there. You have your spoiler, so you have an arm position, which is up like that, and then you can move this through the various positions, 1/3, 2/3, full spoilers, and that's where it stops for flight. On mine, I've got a detent, so I can access on the ground spoiler. And if you arm this, that's the ground spoiler is what's going to come up when you hit the ground and toggle the reverse thrust. So that's the spoilers. Obviously, you've got the 3 engines. And if you've got separate controls, you can do those separately. There is a takeoff alert horn that is tied to both throttle 1 and throttle 2. Throttle 3 does not have that. So when you're testing that, you would test throttle 1, and then you would test throttle 2 and 3 together. And that's how the real aircraft is. That's not a bug. You've got the flap handle right here, which is tied with dial a flap. So the first flap selector is the slats position only, And then you have the dial a flap position, which right now it just went to 10. If I dial this, you notice it's moving the flap handle further and further through the range. So whatever this is set to is where that thing's going to land in the dial a flap detent. It normally sits at 10, and I think for landing you put this down back at 15 if I remember correctly. And then you also have flaps 28, flaps 35, which is your normal landing flap, and then if you need it, flaps 50 for landing. From what I understand, landing with flaps 35 is a little bit easier than landing at flaps 50, but if you need it, you got it. So we can stow that back up. Your engine start switches are right here. These will pop out and turn orange or red when they're working, and then when you get to max motoring, you hit the fuel switches on. The fuel switches are right there. On this panel down here, we have our two radio heads. So COM 1, COM 2, the active and the standby. You change them here and set up and switch them here. Below that is the radio selector panel. So if I wanted to hear VHF 1, if I wanted to hear VHF 2, I could put that on there. VHF 3, HF, the high frequencies, interphone, PA, all that stuff. None of those are really going to do anything. And I don't know, I haven't tried it. I don't know if any of the VORs and ILS and ADFs ident through the radio or not. It would be cool if they do eventually, but I don't know if they do now. You don't really need this anymore because digitally they ident, and so you actually see the identifiers and all that stuff, so you don't really need to listen to that anymore, but I think legally they still have to have the ability to do that. In the real world, obviously, this is the sim. Below that is the weather radar, which again, I don't believe is implemented at the moment. It will turn on, but it will not display a test pattern. It'll just say radar on and test when it's in test mode, and when it's just on, it'll just say radar on and blink at you. But I don't believe it's functional, at least from what I can tell. Below that's the transponder. Don't forget to get into mode C, you need to make sure you have your altitude reporting set to on. It defaults to off. You have two transponders, 1 and 2. Typically we just leave it on 1. We got the code here. A test button right there. The ident button is there. And then we have standby, transponder, mode C only, traffic alert only, and traffic alert and resolution advisory. So standby, ATC can see you, ATC can see you along with traffic, and then traffic, descend, traffic, climb. That's the difference if you're curious. And then below that, I believe this is the ADF. It's not labeled, but actually no, sorry, this is COM 3. Never mind, don't listen to me. That's COM 3. Your ADFs and stuff is going to be programmed through the FMC. So yeah, so you'll notice there's no VOR or NDB heads here. They're all done through the radio nav page in there. So that's COM 3, which again you won't ever really need to touch because that's generally for the ACARs. That's what this is for. Right here you have your display brightness switches for all the 6 of those display units on the front panel. And then these are all the switches for the various pages of the system. So you can see the hydraulic system, the electrical system, air system, fuel system, config, which is flaps, slats, ailerons, rudders, elevators, gear, miscellaneous page, a status page, a consequences page, an ND page, an engine page. So all that's right there. COM 2, like we said, the FO's radio panel is right there. You've got the cockpit door. You can actually put that into deny, and that cockpit door will not open, which is pretty dang cool. And you got a phone, so you can call collect if you need to. It's like for a PA thing. And then you have the aileron trim right here and the rudder trim right there. And they do work. So all modeled. Remember, there's no flight engineer panel in the MD-11, so this is where the flight engineer, that's why it's sitting in a weird way. That's now just a jump seat. And I believe in the real aircraft this will pivot, and so for takeoff they're all looking straight forward. But normally he can sit off to the side and do his homework or something, I guess. I don't know. Whatever the jump seater wants to do. There is one more light knob that I wanted to show you, and that's this guy right here. This will build on the backlighting for all the circuit breaker panels. So just be aware of that. That's a fire extinguisher in case you start the plane on fire. Little coat closet there. Some more little things you can't get into. There's a flashlight. This is probably the smoke goggles, I'm guessing, or maybe the pins. That might be the gear pins, actually. What is this guy? Oxygen, protective breathing equipment. So yeah, all kinds of fun safety things for your safety pleasure. And that is the flight deck. So hopefully that gives you a nice little tour around the place, and you can find what you need to find. We're keeping it under 45 minutes here, so that's good. And that's where we're going to end this particular video, Cockpit Familiarization for the MD-11. Again, you can find me streaming over on Twitch, twitch.tv/Mustafa. I stream there about 3 times a week generally, mostly flight sim, occasionally some other things. If you got any questions, please leave them in the comments below, but the best place to have questions answered is to join the real conversation over on Discord. Link is in the description and the video below. And we'd love to have you over there and see you over there. Also, to join the Twitch streams, you can also ask me live things if you got questions when I'm streaming. It's a great way to do that. And I would ask that you hit the like and subscribe button on this video, so help the channel grow. We've been doing some really awesome growth since the Mad Dog Masterclass video series went live a few months ago. So really appreciate you guys, and hope this is being helpful for you as well. The next lesson here is going to be the actual startup procedures, the cockpit flows for getting this bird up and running before we take it over to Salt Lake City. So we'll see you over on the next one. Take care, everyone.